Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of All in All with Alex. I'm your host, of course, Alex. Today, we have a very special guest, Mr. John. How you doing today, sir?
I'm fine, Alex. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I cannot complain at all today. So, can you give the people a little bit of background about yourself before we get going?
Sure. Thank you so much, Alex. Well, I'm 59. I just had a birthday a couple of days ago. I grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. As you can tell, I'm a very patriotic Canadian, eh? And when I was a kid, I was a real comic book nerd. I was really into Marvel and DC comics. I had a huge collection. And this was at a time when it was kind of stigmatized. It wasn't really as mainstream as it is now because of the success of all the movies. So, excuse me. I kind of felt a little bit like an outsider as a boy. If you're a Canadian boy and you don't like hockey, you were considered back in the day to be something of a weirdo. It's probably different now, but I wanted to be a comic book artist when I was a kid. I was really into drawing. I drew every day back in the 1970s. I don't know why I gave it up. I guess I was too extroverted. And then after high school, I tried acting for a couple of years. I always had an artsy spirit. I always feel that I've always felt that I was meant to do something creative with my life. And so I don't know how old you are, but there was a Western from the 1960s called The Big Valley. It was an American show. And one of the stars of that show, Peter Breck, he came to Vancouver in the 1980s and he started an acting school called the Breck Academy. So I was in my early 20s back then and my life really wasn't going anywhere. So I walked past this acting school and I took acting in high school for 1 year and I really enjoyed it. So I tried acting for a couple of years. I don't mean to name drop, but Gene Hackman came to the Academy one day and Richard Dreyfuss. I mean, they were really huge stars back in the day. And I was going for it. I had an agent and I was going to auditions. And I was doing some writing back then, too. I was writing scenes for myself and my acting partner, and I was writing my own monologues. I would go to auditions and I wouldn't get the part, but the casting directors would often seem to be impressed because they would say, "Well, I never heard that monologue before." And I said, "Well, that's because I wrote it." And again, they always seem to be impressed by that. So I don't mean to gross you. I was in Rocky IV. That was my 15 minutes of fame. I was an extra. Yeah, that always gets a reaction that I like. The big fight at the end with Ivan Drago was shot at the Agrodome in Vancouver. So this was 1987 or 1986. Me and my buddy Jeff went. There was an open casting call, and we're in the audience chanting "Rocky, Rocky." I mean, that was an amazing experience. But unfortunately, I developed psoriasis. Do you know what that is, Alex? It's a skin malcondition where some of us, do you ever get dry skin?
Yes, sir.
Right. So some of us, to such an exaggerated degree that we get like, I don't mean to gross you out. I'm just sharing my story. They just got to be so bad for me, like literally pieces of skin were falling off my face. And I was beginning to feel less like a human being and more like a reptile. So, and psoriasis is hereditary, but it's also exacerbated by mitigating factors like stress. And when I was a young man, I was kind of a Charlie Brown kind of guy. I just worried about over every little thing in a constant state of anxiety, thinking about things beyond my control. And my diet sucked. I'm a recovering sugar addict. I used to be very overweight. I used to weigh anywhere from 235 to 250 pounds. So I was, like I said, I'm a recovering sugar addict. So I gave up on my dream of acting. And of all things, I've been a security guard for 35 years. And that's still today my bread and butter job. And every so often, I've made sporadic attempts at changing my life. I read all these self-help books like Anthony Robbins, Awaken the Giant Within and Unlimited Power. And I listened to the tapes and I did the exercises. But I had carved out this groove for myself. I fell into a routine in life where I was just content to make enough money to keep my head above the water. And I just was not really a very productive person until 2019. And that's when my life changed. And that's why you're interviewing me right now. And what happened was in 2019, and again, thank you for this. I don't mean to be pushy or preachy about this stuff. I'm just sharing my story. What I did was I took a leap of faith. I reached out to God and I said, "Our Heavenly Father, I've been hearing about you my whole life. I've always been something of an agnostic because at the end of the day, I don't think any of us really knows. I mean, it's the hypothetical, the quote unquote afterlife." And so I had to realize about myself that I'm the kind of person who tries a little bit harder if I have it in my mind's eye that someone who loves me and accepts me unconditionally for who I am is rooting for me to make at least some effort towards self-manifestation, kind of like Yoda in Luke Skywalker's rucksack, whispering in his ear, don't give up. So just to backtrack a little bit, I wrote a bunch of short stories in 2005. I created a character called Lee Hacklin, who's a private investigator, and I wrote these short stories. And he's a smoker and a drinker, and he's a ladies' man, but he's got a heart of gold. He's a super sweet natured guy, like myself, or so I like to think, and he likes to help people. And so I just wrote these stories for my own amusement more than anything else. I wasn't aware of Amazon or self-publishing. That wasn't in my mind's eye at all. So after I reached out to God and I asked him to help me, ask and you shall receive. And what I received from God is love. And what I've discovered over the last 5 years, Alex, better late than never, is that love is a great motivator. When we feel loved, we feel motivated or we feel empowered. And again, we need to have that mindset that motivates us to do whatever it is that we want to do with our lives. So in 2019, I dusted off these short stories, and thank God I made hard copies of them. The pages were curled and they were yellow, and I blew the dust off and I read them. And I don't know if you do any creative writing, Alex. Of course, we're all our own worst critics, and it's very hard to be objective, right, about your own stuff. But I was able to read these stories as if somebody else had written them. And I thought, gosh, I know these stories aren't great literature, because at the end of the day, what I'm writing is basically pulp fiction. It's good guys and bad guys. They're the kinds of stories that I grew up with. I thought, gosh, if these stories are written by Joe Blow instead of John Leister, I know I would like them. Well, if I like them, there must be at least one other weirdo in this world who doesn't think that they're total garbage, right? So that was the beginning of my true life's journey of becoming a self-published author. And it was a tremendous uphill struggle for me to get that first darn book posted, because initially I was dealing with Amazon and they were rejecting my banking information. And then I would go to the bank and they would say the right information. I felt like Daffy Duck, losing my mind, going in circles. If I didn't have God in my life, if I hadn't taken this leap of faith, and I started doing this in a parallel timeline, like a parallel universe, like Back to the Future or Star Trek, where I didn't have God in my life, I would have given up after 2 or 3 tries. Because that's just who I was back in the day. Not to beat myself up too much, but I just wasn't if at first you don't succeed, try again. I just wasn't that guy. But because I had taken this leap of faith, I see God as like Big Brother from 1984. Big Brother is watching you, but in a good way, not in a harsh, punitive way, in a loving way. It's like, don't give up. There's potholes in life. There's speed bumps. There's little obstacles we don't anticipate. And you have to figure it out. If plan B doesn't work, you go to plan C. So one day, this magical window appeared on my screen, and this is what it said, Alex. Congratulations, your ebook has been published. Like, I don't know what happened. Maybe there was hiccups with Amazon. But when I saw that on the screen for the first time, I felt something that was very unusual for me. Now, people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right, the real epitome individuals of self-belief, they live their whole lives. They have a goal, they move towards it, they achieve it, then they move on to the next goal. I just wasn't that guy. So it was a very unusual feeling for me of starting something, and there were hiccups along the way. And for once in my full life, I didn't give up. I actually stayed the course and crossed the finish line. And that feeling of elation was so wonderful. I mean, I was just walking on air that day. It was one of the greatest days. My first book, plug, is called The Collected Cases of Lee Hacklin, 1970s Private Investigator, Book 1. And it's a collection of the first short stories that I wrote. I thought, gosh, I'm 53 years old. I'm lucky I made it this far. I don't know how many years I have left, but I want to feel this way all the time. So now it's 2024. I don't deal with Amazon anymore. Anybody out there who wants to be a self-published author, I recommend a website called Draft to Digital. And that's what I use now. It's free. It's super easy to use. I haven't had any hiccups with them. And what they do is if you write a book, it springboards your books to different platforms. So all of my books, and now I have over 100 of these books online now. Now, granted, they're not very long. I mean, some of them are about 20, 30 pages long. I mean, they're short stories, really. But what they do is they springboard your books to different platforms. So all of my books are available on Apple and Barnes and Noble and Kobo and a few others. So that's my story in a nutshell. And my message to the world and to all of you listeners is, for goodness sakes, never let age be a barrier to whatever it is that you want to do with your life. There are a lot of people out there, I feel, who are where I was back in 2019. It's like, oh, I had my 20s. Oh, I had my 30s. I had my 40s. And all I wanted to do was hang out with my friends and get drunk afterwards. I just didn't have that self-belief. It's not too late. One of my favorite authors, Herman Wouk, he wrote his last novel when he was 100 years old. Jack LaLanne, who's one of my absolute great. Do you know who that is? The fitness. He was one of the real gurus of nutrition and bodybuilding and fitness and health. He died working out. He died at the age of 97. He was lifting weights, doing his favorite thing that he wanted to do, and that's how he passed away. And that's how I want to live my life. I will never retire. I will never stop writing. This is my bliss. This is what I was meant to do with my life. Better late than never. And that's my story in a very long-winded nutshell.
Nah, hey, I understand that. That's definitely a interesting story. So how do you feel like living in Vancouver influenced your writing?
How do I feel about living in Vancouver? Well,
Yeah, how do you feel that living in Vancouver influenced your writing?
Um, I don't really know that's really a factor. I mean, I think I'm very lucky. You as an American and as me as a Canadian, I'm trying to answer your question. We're very, very lucky. We're living in a society where the governments, give us enough wiggle room that we can be pretty much whatever it is that we want to be with our lives. And there are many people around the world, and I don't want to get political. I don't want to get geopolitical, but you know as well as I do that there are many people around the world who are very smart and very creative and very wonderful. But unfortunately, they lost the lottery of life because they're living in environments where there's a civil war every other day, or there's tremendous violence, political violence and religious violence, and all the nutty things that there are a lot of really bad people in the world, unfortunately, because God gave us free will. He gave us free will to decide for ourselves, and there are always going to be people who are into power and control. And you and I feel on a comparative scale anyway. I mean, we're not living in utopia. None of us are living in utopian societies because human beings are imperfect. We're fallible. But on a comparative scale, we're living in a free market capitalist societies, and that allow us to make choices for ourselves. And we have we're living in environments like you asked me about Vancouver. First of all, the weather's great compared to the rest of Canada. But again, we have that freedom. And so we owe it to ourselves to take advantage of these opportunities. And I'm always telling people who are my age, for goodness sakes, take advantage of this technology. Reach out to people, reach out to like-minded. And if you don't know what to do with your life, and I get it, there are a lot of people out there who feel that way. Just think about what you like. If you like Star Wars and movies and comic books and all this pop culture stuff, Disney and Marvel, then for goodness sake, do a podcast. I have two podcasts now. One is called the Johnny's Way podcast, and it can be heard on either of my Facebook pages. And I very recently started another podcast. Well, really, my brother Paul Bale, he started this podcast called the Canadian Bro Show, which I co-host, and we've done 5 episodes so far. So if you go to YouTube and enter Paul Bale, Bale, who's not my blood brother, he's my childhood friend. I think he was his brother. And so, again, my message to the world is we have to live in the present. The greatest gift in life is the present. When we think about the past, when we dwell on our regrets and what we should have done or what we shouldn't have done, it disempowers us. We have to have a mindset that empowers us. And when we think about the future, I don't know, maybe it's just me, I don't think it is, we tend to worry. But when we keep our minds in the present, in the here and now, that's what's within our control. And here's another thing. I don't watch the news. I'm a recovering news junkie. I used to listen to all these very conservative podcasts, like the Alex Jones show. I used to listen to Alex Jones every day, 4 hours. The globalists are taking over, like all the mayhem and the madness and the chaos and the corruption and the violence of the world. Once I disengaged from all of that stuff, my mind just naturally gravitated towards what's within my control. And again, it's motivating. We have to think in a way that motivates us to do whatever it is that we want to do with our lives. And so that's basically my story.
Yeah. I mean, no, I would agree. Um, as far as the podcast, so what topics do you typically cover on the Johnny's Way podcast?
Okay, so thank you so much for this question. So what I'm doing is I'm basically reading. They're like audiobooks. I'm reading my stuff. That's basically my podcast. A little excerpts little excerpts here and there from my books. And then the other podcast, the Canadian Bro Show, we're just kind of riffing on any topic under the sun. The last episode that Paul and I did, we talked about our favorite albums growing up when we were kids. We're trying to keep it light. We're trying to keep it inspirational. We're trying to avoid politics and religion, anything that's divisive or controversial. Episode 4, we had a guest. Our first guest was another childhood friend, Keith Bickford, and we talked about comic books. We talked about what it was like being a kid in the 1970s, being comic book nerds, again, at a time where it wasn't really considered socially acceptable. And I also have a group page called Johnny's Way, which I have over, I think, getting up to 900 members now. I want to say somewhere between 800 and 900 members. I don't mean to brag. I don't mean to beat my chest about it, just saying. And I write what I like to think are inspirational and uplifting essays about self-belief and self-manifestation. And I also read, I also work out. Oh, here's another thing after I reached out to God. I lost 65 pounds. My diet changed thank you. My diet, I used to be very overweight. Like I said, I used to weigh, the most I ever weighed, I think, was 250 pounds. I mean, it's a wonder that I'm still alive. I was just pounding down pizza and KFC every day, Haagen-Dazs ice cream and all the worst stuff you can imagine. I was living like a drug addict. But once I reached out to God and I felt his love, sorry, just spat on the phone, and I began to love myself, it's like, I would go to the supermarket and vegetables started looking attractive to me. Because I think that when you love yourself, again, you're just more motivated to take better care of yourself. And we need to have energy to manifest our dreams. And so when I was pounding down all of this junk food every day because I was addicted to this stuff, it's just, it disempowered me. But once I started eating healthier and working out and hitting the weights and doing the yoga, and I work out 2 or 3 days a week and I post videos of myself working out, again, it makes me feel more confident in myself, have more self-confidence, and it gives me energy to do the kind of stuff that I'm doing, the kinds of things like what I'm doing right now. And the difference between what my life is like now, sorry, just spat again.
No, you good.
Versus what it was, but when I didn't have God in my life, I'm having so much more fun now. I thought I was having fun back then, being a couch potato. No, that life sucked. What I'm doing now, reaching out to nice people like yourself, manifesting, writing, following my bliss, doing. We have to do. It's not good enough to when we think about what we want to do with our lives and we procrastinate, we suffer. And those feelings go out into the world and they make other people suffer too. When we start doing, when we start manifesting, then we're showing the world, you know what? This stuff is doable. And we're not only satisfying our own spirits, but we're also, or so I like to think anyway, inspiring other people, to follow their bliss. And it's not too late. I was chatting with a woman on Facebook. She was 87 years old. And she said, John, I looked at all your books and I'm really, I want to do what you're doing. I want to be a self-published author too, but it's too late for me. And I wrote her, and again, I sent her a post back. No, it's not too late. As long as your brain still works, and as long as you have a ton of passion, never mind how old you are. Never mind, how many decades passed where you procrastinated. Live your life in the here and now, and never mind whether it makes you any money, and never mind if other people criticize you, because they will criticize you. And I've had people call me a narcissist. I've had all kinds of criticism since I started doing this, and you just have to let it be gasoline on the fire of your passion. And we have to be careful not to allow other people's negativity to undermine whatever it is that we want to do with our lives. Sorry, I know I proud a lot.
No, you fine, you fine. I don't like to
Thank
interrupt
you.
people because it's all about I'm big on when somebody's talking about something, I don't interrupt them because it's context to what they're saying. You know what I mean? So I like to hear all the context because it makes up the full story. So
Thank you so much. Thank you,
so
Alex.
so how many podcasts have you featured on before, like as far as like being a guest on?
Gosh, that's a good question. I want to say about 10 to 15. Not very many, but if
Okay.
any of your listeners out there, if you go to YouTube and if you type in John Leister, you can check out some of the podcasts that I've been on. It's all pretty much the same stuff. And I also have, if you type in John Leister on YouTube, you can check out some of my videos. I have quite a few videos on YouTube besides being a guest on other people's podcasts.
Okay. So what was your most recent book about, and what inspired you to write it?
Okay. So my most recent book is called Lee Hacklin, Private Investigator in Tyrant and Tirade. And it basically takes place in a small town, and Lee is hired to investigate the murder of a mayor and the chief of police. And it's basically a Western set in the 1970s. One of my favorite authors is a writer named William W. Johnstone, and his niece J.A. Johnstone, who sort of picked up the reins after he passed away. He wrote a lot of Westerns and sort of post-apocalyptic thrillers. And I like his writing because he writes the kind of stories that I like, good guys and bad guys. And that's what I'm writing basically, the kinds of stories that I grew up with. And then the one I wrote before that was called the PTA Team, which is about the murder of a very conservative high school principal. I kind of based him on the Morgan Freeman character from Lean on Me. Did you ever see that movie Lean on Me with Morgan Freeman? I kind
Yeah.
of based him on that character a little bit. And he's basically murdered by a group of very left-wing parents and teachers who object to what how he's trying to help the kids at school. I mean, again, it's all I'm doing really is I'm just regurgitating all of the movies and TV shows and books and comic books that I grew up with. And I think this is something that a lot of writers do. We're creating worlds that we want to live in. I think that's what Gene Roddenberry did when he created Star Trek. Star Trek to me is not so much about Klingons and photon torpedoes. It's about presenting a gold standard of what human beings can be. And I like a story where the main character, the protagonist, is someone that I can look up to, someone who's good and brave and fearless and steps up to the plate. And we all like that. You look at the most popular movies of all time, whether it's Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or whatever, right? We like those kinds of stories because they're Indiana Jones, because they're uplifting, because they inspire us. They make us feel good. We look at what the heroes, we look at their trials and tribulations, and suddenly the problems of our lives don't feel so insurmountable. And so those are the kinds of stories that I like to write. All my stories have happy endings, except for the bad guys. The bad guys all get there richly, and the villains in my stories are really, really bad. I don't want to get on my high horse about this, but I don't like the way Hollywood, so many filmmakers today, they create these sympathetic villains. Like they give villains these likable qualities, and to me, that's not a villain. To me, a villain is a really a bad person who enjoys harming people for no other reason than it gives them because they're into power. Because you ever see Dirty Harry? There's a scene in Dirty Harry where the DA says to Clint Eastwood, "Well, how do you know the killer's going to kill again?" And Harry says, "Because he likes it." That's the only reason, because he likes it, because it gives him pleasure to do it. So, my boy Lee Hacklin, he's basically me. He's an idealized version of me. He's much more handsome. He's much cooler. He certainly has a more exciting love life than I do. It's a wish fulfillment. I think that's what Ian Fleming did when he created James Bond, or Stan Lee when he created Spider-Man back in the day with Steve Ditko. We're creating idealized versions of ourselves, and it's so much fun, and it's very therapeutic too, because I was bullied as a boy. I was a very gentle giant. I never stood up for myself. And so writing these stories for me is very therapeutic. I draw upon my personal experiences, and I fictionalize a lot of the stuff. And so that's my story in a nutshell.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you feel your writing has evolved since you first started publishing?
Okay. Well, I think that my stories have become much shorter. I mean, my first few books were between probably more like 100 to 200 pages. They're getting shorter and shorter, and I'm fine with that. Oscar Wilde said, "Brevity is the soul of wit." A story is as long as it needs to be. And I don't know if my writing has really changed that much. I mean, basically, it's just all I know. I never imagined how prolific that I could be. I never imagined 5 years ago that every time I opened my notebook, I would be able to crank out 2 or 3 single space pages. Again, it's that feeling of discovery. You never know what you're capable of doing until you actually do it. And then once you start doing it and you realize how much you love it, then that will perpetuate a continuance. I tried stand-up comedy. There's a bar a couple of blocks away from here. Yeah, I tried it 4 times. I thought, I'm uninhibited. I can get up. I can tell jokes. And I discovered that it wasn't a good fit for me. Standing on stage and all these faces looking up at me, expecting me to make them laugh every 10 seconds. And I remember when I stopped doing it, I tried it 4 times and then I stopped doing it. I thought, gosh, is this another example of me quitting because something is harder than I thought it would be? I thought, no, I tried something out. I discovered that it wasn't a good fit for me and I moved on. Writing is what I was meant to do with my life. And I have a lot more stories to tell. And if I ever run out of ideas, there's always the internet, and better late than never. This is what I was meant to do with my life.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you just entertain people in a different way. That's all.
Right, exactly. And
So,
basically I'm entertaining myself. And
oh
my
yeah,
my I have it in my mind's eye that I'm going to meet someone out there, my Alan Ladd Jr., Alan Ladd Jr. was the executive at Fox at Greenland Star Wars. When George Lucas was trying to sell Star Wars back in the day, nobody was biting. And this is an important life lesson. You can have a great idea and everyone in your immediate vicinity thinks is total garbage. You have to keep knocking on doors. You have to find that one person, that one man or woman who believes in your idea as you do. And I have it in my mind's eye that the day's coming where I'm going to talk to some actor, some ridiculously handsome young actor on Messenger and say, "Hey, congratulations, Brad. I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is you're going to die someday. The good news is the bad news is you're going to die someday. The good news is you're Lee Hacklin." That's what I have in mind's eye. And if I never get to ring that bell, if a Lee Hacklin streaming series never happens, or if none of my books ever get adapted into a film or animation or graphic novel, it doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter. That's the goal that I have in my mind's eye. But I'm on the journey. I'm on the journey of my life. Our destinations are all the same. We're all headed for the same place, right? These bodies that our spirits are driving, they're going to conk out like cars. What's important, it's the most important thing, is that we're enjoying the journey, the process, the doing. And again, never mind whether it makes you any money and never mind what other people think. We're doing it for our spirit and for our own peace of mind. And there's nothing more important than peace of mind, in my opinion.
right. Yeah, I would agree. So what do you have? Do you have any books coming up that you're in the process of writing now?
So I started another one yesterday called Lee Hacklin, Private Investigator in Once More with Killing. And Lee has a niece named Gretchen, and they have a very adversarial relationship. She doesn't like the way Lee, kills the bad guys, and she's taking acting classes, and her acting teacher is murdered. So that's just the way I write. I come up with a general idea. I don't. Some writers, they plot everything out in advance, right? They kind of script it all out in advance, kind of like a blueprint. I write the way like a jazz musician plays a saxophone. Now really don't know very much about jazz music, but I've heard that it's very improvisational, and that's how I write. I just open my notebook. I have a basic idea. I had an acting teacher in high school, Mr. Henderson. God bless his soul. He had us do an exercise called speed writing. Do you know what that is? He would write on the chalkboard. I was walking home from school. Dot dot dot, and then he had a stopwatch and he would for 5 minutes, and you had to write stream of consciousness for 5 minutes. And of course, some of us came up with some pretty wild scenarios, and that's how I write. I just open my notebook, and an hour later, usually looking at 2 or 3 single space pages. I don't know if it's good. I don't claim to be a good writer. I just know that I can do it, and that it elates me to do it. And every time I write, I make myself laugh. Sometimes I make myself cry, or discover something new about these characters. And that's the most exciting thing, is that, again, it's that feeling of discovery. So that's it. That's John Leister in a nutshell.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So can you after this interview is over, I'm gonna get you to send me all the links to everything if I don't already have them. That way, people can go and find your books and they can check them out and buy them and go support you, and they can go join your Facebook group and and find
Thank you
any
so
other way
much.
to, as
I've
possible.
I've I've done this before. Look, I want to make money doing this. I want to be a professional writer. That's my goal. But I love to share, and time permitting, I would be more than happy to email anybody who's interested one of my short stories or one of my books. My email is johnleister611@hotmail.com. And I love getting feedback, even if it's critical. And I know a lot of writers, they're so sensitive about criticism. And I always tell them, don't be look at the criticism and look at it objectively. there might be something in there that you can learn from. And also look at it this way: at least they're reading your stuff. Even if they think that it's garbage, so what? At least they paid attention to it. At least
Exactly.
they read it.
Exactly. You can't be
Right?
nobody becomes great without criticism. So
Exactly. And
so
if it's I mean, if somebody writes, "Oh, what you wrote sucks," that's not very useful. But if they write something specific, it's like, "Oh, you're using too much profanity," or too many. Someone said you use too many comments, whatever it might be. Again, look at it objectively, and it might something that might make you a better writer.
right. I would agree. So
Yeah. Thank you.
so definitely, John, I definitely want to thank you for taking your time out today to come on the show and tell your story,
Thank you, sir.
and to definitely talk about your book. And so I'm going to get all your information. I'm going to put it down in the description. So everybody that's watching, I want you guys to go in the description. I want you guys to support John in any way possible. Join his Facebook group. Support him everything that he has going on. Make sure you buy one of his books. That's the
Thank you,
goal.
sir.
Buy at least one
And
of his books.
Alex, I posted a link to your YouTube channel on my Facebook page, just so you're
Okay.
aware.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's all about sharing.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I want, it's not just about me self-promoting. I want to help other people too. I want what's best for everybody who believes in themselves as much as you and I do, because there's
Yeah.
so much negativity in this world. And so we need to help each other, to push back against that and to show people, what? Our dreams are worth pursuing. Our dreams are worth manifesting. And if it's not too late for me at 59, then it's not too late for anybody.
Yep. I agree. So once again, I thank you for your time. Everybody that's out there watching, you guys have just watched another episode of All in All with Alex, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Peace.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.